Welcome to the July 2024 edition of Patch Tuesday Support Group, a safe place to talk about patching. This month have not failed to find a special guest. If anybody on here has a particular thing they want to talk about next month, reach out and let us know. We're always looking for a list of people to come and talk about something for 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes that interests them. Which is okay because we always go long. So it's just myself, my esteemed coworker Jordan, and then also we have Jake. Jake is also here.
Wow, rude.
Happy to help, Brian. Happy to help.
How rude. And as
Jake
always,
Brian helping or Ben helping. I'm not sure.
As always, Jordan will start us off talking about the latest releases. Well, he'll talk about the latest releases, Patch Tuesday, and the wonderful vulnerabilities that we are now painfully aware of. And I will finish up by bringing you the news. And at the end, if there's time, we'll open it up for any open questions. So, I hand it over to you, Jordan.
All right. Every time you hand it over to me, I feel like I should be like standing here being like in the weather or something. I don't know why that seems to be the feeling that I feel like I should have, but
we have the technology. We could get you a green screen. Like
we could do it. Anyways, all right. So
but if you do, you'd have to hold your hands like this, just like Ben is.
Okay.
That's the only
hold up the like
the
weather, the patches. All right.
Yes, cool. Yes.
Just a pile of patches.
Oh, dude, that's what we need.
87 degrees of patches.
This is what we need. We need to have a dashboard that's behind you. Your background is the dashboard. So you can see in this area.
In this area here, we've had
80% of CVEs have moved from the west into the east.
Exactly.
Next time we'll make it happen.
Speaking of patches and speaking of CVEs this month, in particular for it, we've had a small, shall we say, small increase this month in comparison to previous months, as well as some mildly alarming numbers in the Microsoft territory. So for CVEs this month, there were 6 that were marked as critical. We had 134 get marked as important and 3 as moderate. And for anybody doing math at home, that 6 plus 3 is 9 and 134 is 143 CVEs this month for it. Of the breakdown of all of those wonderful CVEs that you have yet to experience or hopefully have already started patching in some instances, we have 17 that result in the denial of service, 26 resulting in an elevation of privilege, 9 in information disclosure, 60 in remote code execution, which should make everybody sad, 24 in security feature bypasses, and 7 spoofing opportunities. The big thing that I thought was kind of interesting this month in terms of the patches that came out here for it is CVE 2024-38076. Again, that is CVE 2024-38076. And I will go ahead and throw that here in the chat for folks. There you go. This one is CWE 122 is a type of vulnerability, which is a heap-based buffer overflow. The reason this is kind of sort of interesting is if anybody here who's running remote desktop gateway or has already gateway license servers that sit out there to then service those, apparently you can send them bad packets now in a way or a structured format such that it allows you to run arbitrary code on the box. And it was, those servers commonly happen to face the internet, so it's kind of not great. This one did come in with a 9.8. In fact, all of the CVEs here that I'm going to talk about are a 9.8 on the CVE scale. None of them that I saw at the time of when I looked, at least, had active exploits that are out there in the wild, but it is basically applicable to Server 2016, Server 2019, Server 2022, Server 2012 R2, all of them across the board. Second verse, same as the first in the set of notes, CVE 2024-38074. That is, again, CVE 2024-38074. And the reason why I say second verse, same as the first, is because guess what? Same vulnerability, different methodology. This time it is going to be CWE 191. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw these here in the chat real quick because you might be going, what the heck do you mean CWE 191? Because typically on the side of things, when we are in the patching state, we end up in this bucket where, if I can actually manage to copy paste, apparently that's difficult on a Mac. We typically, from the security side of things, or in the patching side of things, I should say, don't necessarily always get to see the actual reason for the vulnerability definition. So a CWE is the actual definition of a common weakness or enumeration, what the actual like root underlying vulnerability or the method of attack is. So what these are here, this CVE 2024 and 38076, CWE 122 and CWE 191 are basically two different weakness enumerations of the same vulnerability. So one is by doing an overflow on the buffer, and the other one is by doing an underflow on the buffer using integers for it. And what's extra bonus surprising on top of all of that is we got CVE 2024 388077. Third verse, same as the first. A third methodology of exploiting it again, back to back to back. So I can't stress this enough. Out of all of your patching, not all of these are addressed, I should say, by your cumulative updates this month. So you should go do that for it. But there
Are you saying some people have figured out how to exploit this? It feels like you're saying
somebody has really, if you have remote desktop gateways or have remote desktop gateway license servers, somebody has really thoroughly figured out how to exploit this. You should care a lot about this month's cumulative patch. You also should care about this a lot, this month's cumulative update patch, if you happen to kind of sort of have Hyper-V in your environment. Let me pull up this article. You may have this article too. I don't actually know. I haven't looked at what you submitted this month, Brian. For CVE 2024 38080. Now, this one's kind of interesting in that the release date for it was not quite wrapped up along the way with everything else. But this is actually a privilege vulnerability escalation where basically you could escalate to get system permissions on a Hyper-V host, which is, suboptimal. What's interesting about this vulnerability and the reason I want to highlight it, again, that's CVE 2024 38080, is that while you can do this, and it has officially been declared that there is active exploit code out there in the wild, that it is actively being used and it is semi-mature, there's been no further details, and as a result, it's been slated as a 3.8 vulnerability on the host from the VM. Yeah, it's an active exploit of elevation of privileges, I believe, currently, Florian, for the question that was asked there in the chat. It might be host-based, but yeah, it is you can get system access when you're not system, either on the host or from the VM. I haven't dug deep into it yet. It is 2024 38080 for whoever just asked the CVE number again for that one. Again, should be wrapped up in your cumulative update model for it. But things to care about if you have Hyper-V, and it was really low on the vulnerability spectrum for something that is active exploit out there. I haven't dug into it looks like you do have to have it. It would have to have an attacker inside the network at this point. It's not publicly facing. That might be related to why it was so low. But it's definitely something to be concerned about, as Hyper-V is pretty prevalent out there in the world. Moving from here
and becoming more prevalent as VMware people flee from
Broadcom things happen. I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, and VMware being silly about stuff. So, but yeah,
they have a plan. They have a business. Everyone has a business plan.
Everyone has a plan. Whether it survives, that's the whole other conversation.
Am I supposed to have a plan?
Well, for you, it's optional.
Okay, good.
So on to our
wait a minute. Says the guy who spent at least 5 minutes making a specific background in OBS and.
Yes, Brian. Only 5 minutes. Yep.
Yes. We're on record. I don't want to get you fired.
Appreciate you, sir.
I'm here for it.
So on to about updates from Patch My PC. So this month we have 2,708 updates walking their way in the door. That's certainly more than one. For the severity of updates and the severity of things over this past month that have been in the catalog, we have a critical set of 92, a moderate set of 2,062, important 478, and a low of 11. So lots and lots of patches just in general that are kind of in that moderate range this month. Not a lot of major in the critical chunk. Bringing us over to browser wars, Google Chrome has managed to come in with a whopping 12 patches this month. Firefox, again, do keep in mind this is accounting for all of the different possible language permutations. A whopping 216 updates, 18 for Edge and 12 for Opera. Something that is a little bit...
Is it this month or the last 30 days, Jordan?
It is from last patch Tuesday, June's patch Tuesday, to July's patch Tuesday for it.
Listen, we already talked about math. Now you're talking about dates. Let's not.
Well, I
talk
just
about
want to make
date
sure because I
math.
thought Google Chrome hadn't released an actual
Well,
update in the last, what, 14
That's actually my
days?
next piece of that's my
All right.
next commentary piece of news here. This is one of the most interesting things I think in terms of patches that have come out this month for third-party updates is that Google Chrome somehow has managed to not have to release an update in the last 15 days, which is
Wow.
like
Can
almost
we have a
kind of
moment?
record.
I think we should just take like a
Pour
moment
one
of
out.
silence.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that was lovely. I'm glad we had that little time together. Is this why Andrew gets to fly off today and go somewhere fun? He's like, I don't have to do a Chrome update finally.
I'm going to
pretty much.
Disneyland.
That or Java,
going to
one of the
Disney,
two. For it. Of the things that came out for third-party patches this month, though, I did want to call out one particular joyous thing is OpenSSH. So OpenSSH CVE 2024-6387, which is, guess what? A regression of previous vulnerabilities in OpenSSH. Surprise, surprise, for creating race conditions where you end up being able to send bad things along. And the reason I just want to bring that up is just because of the fact that OpenSSH historically has been incredibly challenging, shall we say, to go out and try to fix along the way for it. So I think that's everything that I want to talk about and cover today, Brian. I think I'm
Okay.
gonna willingly hand it over to you for once.
Why? Wow, that's a
I
terrible,
know.
terrible
I know,
choice
right?
you've made.
Oh, actually, I lied. I'm not going to hand it over to you just yet because somebody asked to I know it's just really fun to just grab it and yank it right back out of your hand. It brings me joy. Somebody did ask about CVEs and do we list the CVEs and things like that on the website? We do list a bunch of the articles that we talk about today, as well as a bunch of the CV information for it. We also, I think we've teased a little bit about this along the way. We are working on creating some interesting things, shall we say, in CVE tracking in general that will have even more information and news information about those that is going to come up even more real time that we'll probably talk about later on this year. So stay tuned. We'll see. No promises.
Okay. Are you done for real? For real or?
Maybe.
You know he'll interrupt just like I
I'll
do.
think about it.
Let's see if I can figure out how to share an actual thing. Hey, there we go. Share. You'd think like 5 years into this, what?
Full screen of Zoom.
Light screen,
all the
full screen
whiteness.
Zoom immediately.
Oh yeah, well.
My eyes, my sight melons.
Can you make this dark mode?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, you can. It's called plugins. Dark
Okay.
Reader. Yeah.
Anyways. So we haven't had one of these in a while. Somebody asked about having Patch Tuesday support group on Friday, and part of the reason we picked Thursday was really because there's a balance. But we were trying to kind of strike as a balance between like, okay, how long does it take to figure out that there's big issues we want to talk about and like you should be worried about? As where like if it's too late, it's like, well, you already know them because they're happening in your environment. So and I bring it up because like this is kind of one of those. I'm seeing anecdotal evidence, so there's no listed KB here, but for Windows 10 and include well, this is the Windows 10, but on Server 2016 and Server 2019, I believe there is some kind of anecdotal issue of terminal services gateway crashing every 30 minutes or so after the latest update. So Jordan scared the crap out of you that, hey, if you run RDS, like you should be scared. The good news is it might crash every 30 minutes. So you're fine.
This
anyways.
is fine.
It's fine. But just, again, that's not official. I don't see that here, but I have had 4 or 5 people kind of mention that they are seeing that happen. So just be aware. The next thing is, and this was asked already in the question months ago, an update. So back in May, KB 5036980 broke the Windows 11 Enterprise subscription activation, which basically means you can't change or activate your OS to be enterprise, which means it can't be part of E5 or E3, I believe. People have been waiting every single month for that to get fixed. And this month, some people thought they were promised that would be fixed. And it seems like, no, that has not actually happened yet. So our very own Rudy Ooms, who joined us last month, both joined us at Patch My PC, but also joined this particular webinar. He has updated this page recently to be like, yeah, nope, not really fixed. Not yet. So sorry. That is kind of shameful. Man, that's not great. But sorry, that is not yet fixed. Moving on to some fun things that have happened. In the past months, we've talked about some ransomware hitting various medical providers. So Ascension was a big one, and Jordan is somewhat familiar with them, and caused big long outages in the last excuse me, month and a half. CDK, which is a software vendor that apparently a very large percentage of U.S. car dealerships use, they got ransomware, and it took them literally months. So if anybody on this call has been trying to buy a new car in the U.S., chances are it has been an absolute shit show. And this is just kind of one of those things, just yet another example of, hey, this is, here's a SaaS platform. Everyone's using it. It's all one. And they got taken down. They got taken down hard. And, literally dealerships were having to revert to try and do things on paper, which did not go well for them. And it was not a quick recovery. I believe it went into 6 to 10 weeks or so. In fact, some of it only recently, I think last week, did they start actually bringing dealerships back up. So just one of those fun stories you want to go read about.
A lot of time, the reason for that, a lot of time has to do with back-end architecture for it from a design perspective. So a lot of time, like core internal services will come up first for stuff like that. But because of the way that all of those dealerships like have to be integrated together, whether it is, and this is true not just for dealerships or car instances like that, but a lot of like chain buildings where they have a lot of buildings, hub and spoke type infrastructure like that, where maybe a dealership is part of a larger family of them, or maybe a restaurant chain from a franchise perspective for it as well has them. As those kind of like get rolled up into different corporate components, there tends to be this, well, what's the fastest way that we can merge together Active Directory infrastructure so that we can start to move to the side of the other thing? Yep. And then all of that starts having to be untangled in the middle of those types of incidents for it, because if the top tree or the root gets compromised, everything else down from it then gets compromised, which results in those long downtimes as part of it. It's not that the actual like initial piece of it, of like recovery is, it's the how do we undo and redo all of that tech debt that gets attached to it at the end as a result because of it to fix along the way.
Yeah, and there's kind of another angle on that is I've never worked at a car dealership, but what happens in industries like car dealerships? And actually, I was at my dentist last week, and you look over and you look at the software that they're putting stuff in, right? And I'm like, how is that software? Do you like that software? Like, no, it's shite. It's terrible. I'm like, oh, is there better software? They're like, there's other software. It also sucks. It also sucks. But like, you have these industries where you get 2 or 3 players, because that's only like, because it's super bespoke software. And, to your point of tech debt, it's like, well, there's no, you just end up with really crusty old software, but it does the one, it's this bespoke thing for this bespoke industry. We often in this group kind of complain about, oh, Microsoft sucks, and, Office sucks, like all of these things are terrible. And, we're not wrong, but just imagine if there wasn't tens of millions of users of your software, and it was like 1,000 people, and they're sort of beholden to you to continue doing your software. Like, it can get real ugly. And again, I've never used, like, I'm talking in the general sense. I've never used CDK products. I've never worked in a dealership, but I've seen across industries, you have these things. And healthcare is one of the, healthcare is one of the big ones too, right? Like, there's only a handful of people that are willing to do, vendors that have software to do these things. And they become, really big honeypots.
Yep. And the other thing too is like, think about the data that like goes into that, right?
Oh yeah.
You go into a car dealership and you're like, hey, I want to buy a car. And they're like, great, we need to do a credit check. So what are the first thing you give them? You have to give them your things like your social security number and all of those other bits and pieces. And you certainly hope that all those things get shredded along the way, right? Like, there's dozens of tiny interactions like that. And then like, does the local car dealership have an IT department? I don't know, maybe. How do they actually like safeguard all that data? Not, and this is not to just like pick on any one particular.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
The owner's nephew,
problem,
right?
Like, but it's a serious problem, And I don't want to slam on, car dealerships or any one particular industry, but it's a real problem when those are like, those are just safeguards that are really hard to get around, and they're incredibly juicy targets to go after.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of really juicy targets, Polyfill. So there was we talked over the months about supply chain attacks. Polyfill. What is a polyfill? Some of you, you know who you are, might run some really crappy old browsers. I'm not saying IE11, but I'm saying IE11. And so what software vendors or people that build websites will do is they will use what's called a polyfill. And what that does is takes a modern development concept for a modern browser and kind of hacks it back into work for an older browser like IE11. And so there is apparently a very popular one using this polyfill, and you can read that on this website here. And basically what happened is the guy, again, there's this, I should have found that picture. There's always this picture, and we talked about it months ago when we talked about open source software. There's basically one guy maintaining this one little GitHub repo that gets used by everything, and he kind of got sick of it. Somebody just offered him a lot of money for it, and he's like, sure. Now that just happened to be, we believe, a Chinese hacker group that offered that money. And so it's gone poorly. You can read all about it. But it's used in a ton of sites, and so a bunch of different hosting platforms, including Google itself, has had to go in and try and just fix this by releasing their own polyfill versions, and literally on the fly. Even though if you're hosting with this hoster, they are literally going to swap the polyfill you have for another one. It's a real interesting read.
I do think there's an interesting thought experiment there of business model, right? Of what's the cost? And I'm sure, and then to a degree there is, right, that exists today of the cost of buying a vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder to a degree there's also probably what's the cost of buying a supply chain,
Yeah, that's what that's literally what happened.
Yeah. But I'd be interested, as a large scale thought experiment, right? Because this is just a one-off scenario for this one, how many millions of times does this occur? So if we were to actually find out oh, this dude was paid $400,000 or $300,000 for this thing at this layer, right? What's the cost then as a result that people could, or that a group could actually generate to buy supply chains, basically, especially in those big for the things that big vendors use just all the time because they have to.
Right. A few months ago, I'm trying to remember all the details, but we had the one where, there was a whole group of kind of fake accounts kind of started slamming and beating up on this one open source software guy.
Yep.
And then he just kind of started accepting help from this other person who probably didn't exist, but put super obfuscated code. It's well, what if you just yeah, right. What if instead you just paid him $1 million, paid him $100,000 or $200,000? Would he just be like, "No, here you go, I don't care anymore"? Maybe. I don't know. But anyways, supply chain still a problem. This one was kind of interesting. So Microsoft, historically, I didn't really even think about this, and Jordan, you will have opinions, I'm sure. Microsoft has had issues where they've found problems in their cloud service. Let's just say you have a SaaS service and you find a vulnerability. And by the time you can report it, you've already fixed that vulnerability, right? Because it's really easy to do that in SaaS. Hey, it's gone. We fixed it. We fixed the problem. Nobody in the world no longer has this vulnerability. That's kind of the, that's the promise of SaaS. And I guess historically, they would simply, when that happened, they would not release a CVE. They wouldn't really say, hey, we had a vulnerability, but it's already fixed. If it's already fixed, I guess they just didn't do it. And maybe you can add some detail there, Jordan. But they have come out and said, well, no, okay, if we find a vulnerability and we fix it, we're still going to tell you about it. I think that's the distillation of this.
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting about this, and what's kind of challenging, there's an interesting problem here too for customer risk, right? Is when do you disclose something, right? At what point do you disclose a vulnerability, and does it go from being something that's helpful to being something that's harmful? And it's a challenge that not only Microsoft, but organizations and vendors around the world are starting to get challenged with, as regulatory requirements and state laws and government laws are starting to try to push people that, well, you need to disclose X within 28 hours or within 48 hours of discovering this thing. And the
Mhm.
challenge is for a company, for example, like Microsoft, let's say they found this vulnerability and we know that I think like the time to release an update to the Intune service model, right? Like I'm trying to think, like, I think it's all like publicly documented. I think you can actually see like the release cadence for the last set of Intune updates even, right?
Okay.
Like
Yep.
I'm just picking on that one for as an example. Let's say there was a vulnerability in it, right? If you had to wait, right? Let's say an announcement comes out that this is a vulnerability, and the time frame between that to when it gets shipped, right? It's a long time to wait and live with that chunk of a vulnerability that now people know and can do things about, and they can't ship it. You can't do anything about it because it's cloud. It's in somebody else's data center, right? So it's lots of risk then that gets published out there. So companies, vendors, especially when it comes to SaaS, are put in this really hard scenario where there has to be this degree of trust where companies are going to do the best they can to help support and keep a customer protect. But we also have to stay accountable by like being like, yeah, no, we actually did fix it. Now, I think it's actually a good step that Microsoft is taking here, right? And I hope that we start to see more companies like starting towards doing this, right? Like as we fix them, because it's just true is that there are going to be vulnerabilities and there are going to be scenarios in which disclosing vulnerabilities, much like, you hear it said in cop TV show dramas all the time. I can't disclose the ongoing state of an investigation, right? Because it'll risk you, right? Like when that is true, organizations have to be able to do that to protect their customers, right? But we also need to be able to have a degree of transparency and accountability around fixing those and what the learning lessons from it was. So I think it's a really good first step.
All right. Cool.
Sorry, I'll stop rambling.
No, it's good stuff. Moving along. So WordPress. Anybody's using WordPress in their enterprise or publicly, there was a little backdoors slipped into a whole bunch of plugins. If you use WordPress, you know that WordPress basically lives and dies based on putting in plugins, and as yet another supply chain attack. Supply chain attack. There were a bunch that were found injecting malicious code, so that's a good time. TeamViewer. So TeamViewer, they had a thing. They had an incident. So if you're using TeamViewer, you should go ahead and review this. Specifically, it was their internal IT environment that appeared to be compromised. So I don't believe that this was like, okay, TeamViewer, the product, got compromised, but attackers were able to get into TeamViewer's IT infrastructure. Another interesting one to me, Google. The world basically works based on trust. Often works based on certificates. Certificate trust is based on root certificate authorities, and Google Chrome is saying basically we're going to boot a particular certificate authority out at this point. So they are dropping Entrust/AffirmTrust as a public certificate authority. And they're going to do that so on or before October 2024. So if I say this because if you, I guess if you get your certs from them, you should go ahead and
not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. And you can read this. There's a certain. I'm sure there's discussion about whether or not that's the right move for them to make. But Google basically said, yeah, they seem to have too many security incidents, and we no longer choose to trust them. To be clear, this is only for Google Chrome, I believe. I don't think this impacts Microsoft OS, but just be aware of that, especially if you have any of those certs. Regression. So OpenSSH.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
That's that CVE that I posted earlier. I recognize that.
Totally some goats. OpenSSH was known to have a security vulnerability, and if I remember right, OpenSSH is it's not a supply chain attack. Like OpenSSH is used by a lot of things, or is part of a lot of things, and so it's not like, okay, well, I got to go update OpenSSH. It's like, well, I got to figure out all the things that use OpenSSH and follow that vendor to make sure that they have put up a new version. I think that's how, if I remember right, that is the scenario here. That said, here's a little Twitter breakdown of this specific issue, and kind of talking about like, okay, there's some mitigating factors here that might mean this isn't quite, we should patch, but it's not like you can go pull Ethernet cords of anything at this moment. moving along. A few months ago, we had an exploit, not a release of like a whole bunch of passwords. And it wasn't like a new crack. It wasn't like, okay, these guys hacked Ticketmaster, which I think actually did happen. I actually just finally got my own
Me
Ticketmaster
too.
notice. Okay, you
Yep.
got that
Yep,
today.
I got yesterday actually, but yeah, yep.
Right. So this isn't a new thing, but it is, and this RockU had one in 2021 or 2022, I think, too. But again, it's just somebody that went in and gathered a whole bunch of username and passwords, or just passwords, and shoved them together and released them. So there's like 10 billion passwords, which again, it's not like you can do anything about this, but that is a heck of a data set to feed into any attack you're trying to do. So I mentioned that for that reason. This is kind of an interesting one. We actually internally debated about whether this is even worth mentioning, but I go with the side of sure, why not? Microsoft bans Android for its China staff and mandates iPhones for it. Now that the reason for this is that Google has chosen not to have Google services run in China. And there's a whole bunch of probably reasons that, but by not doing so, you can't run Microsoft Authenticator app on an Android phone in China. You can't, as I understand it, use the Google Play App Store in China because Google services isn't there. And so there's a sort of intuitive knee jerk to be like, oh, Microsoft thinks Apple's products are more secure than Google's. I don't know that that's what I would say here. It's just that the reality is that in China, Microsoft can't run their own MFA tool on Androids. And this may shock you, but Microsoft probably demands that some, but not all of their staff use MFA and use Microsoft's own MFA tool to do so. In fact, that was actually, if there's anything kind of to me interesting, if you read this article, it suggests that maybe there were some employees that didn't need to use MFA before.
MFA?
Right,
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
That's the big thing for me that I took out of it. Why I thought it's way more interesting, right? There's two things I think that are way more interesting here. One is the fact that this creates an implication, right? That like to a degree that they were like, you can either one use some other type of authentication, right? I would hope, right? Or just we aren't going to do multi-factor for those particular users who happen to use Android phones over there, which seems not great, right? In general.
Yeah, I mean, this move is due to the lack of Google. Like, that's not new. The lack of Google mobile services, that's not new. Just that Microsoft's saying, oh, well, maybe that's really bad, and we need to solve that problem. So I agree. Yeah. It's kind of funny to me that the fact that this is news is itself, kind of interesting.
Well, and what's interesting, the second point though is I do think it's interesting is I think that this is actually a interesting from like an investment perspective. Like this is money the company is starting to put behind, like we're going to start shifting towards how do we do security. It wasn't that they just went out and said like, no, we're not, or no, or you have to use like a YubiKey or this or that or another thing. Like they went out and bought like thousands of phones, basically, presumably, right? Or some unknown number of phones, right? For the people that were there that were impacted by this. Like it's an actual like real financial investment that we can see as outside people like looking in that the company is making towards the security statements that we keep hearing from Microsoft amidst all of the things that have been going on lately of, well, how we're going to take security first. If you have to choose between this or this, we're going to do security first. So it's an interesting real world application you can start to see where they're like, yeah, this is a problem and this is how we're going to throw money at it to solve it. To actually see it as opposed to just being like hand wavy, we've got technical control, sure, and we're having a policy to do it. So it's interesting to see that.
Sure, whatever you said, we're all just dying at the ads on this horrible site.
Well,
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Okay, another fun blast radius. So if you use Radius, and many of you do, I think Wi-Fi connection seems to be the common use case. Blast Radius has historically used MD5 as its hashing technique. MD5 has been known to be insecure, if you will, since 2004 was one of the original papers on this. Now, that's true. It was, proven to be crackable, but not in a practical sense, right? What I mean by that is to effectively do an attack, it would take you, I believe it was days, possibly months, to be able to crack it. So yes, it was insecure, but practically speaking, no, you weren't going to do that. In particular, in order to do a man-in-the-middle attack, you can't take you hours, right? You can't do a man-in-the-middle attack. Doesn't work if you're like, well, I'm going to get this traffic, and I'm going to go try and crack it for 5 months, and then I'll come back and crack it and then do it. Like it has to be quick. And so, despite knowing for 2 decades now that MD5 is insecure, they have radius implementations have, by and large, stuck with MD5. And what this exploit, this thing is, it's almost not an exploit. What this really just did is they figured out how to do it better. So they figured out how to crack MD5 in minutes, and that's only in the academic world. And what they mean by that is like, well, they had a host of really shitty 7 to 10-year-old systems and a couple of graphics card, couple of newest graphic card. They were able to crack MD5 in like 2 or 3 minutes. But if somebody went and spent like, $50,000 on a rig, they could probably do it in a minute or possibly even seconds. It does require a man-in-the-middle attack. So this isn't like super kind of crazy, but also it's not a remote, an RCE, right? It's not a remote exploit, but if there's a man-in-the-middle, especially like you're connecting to that random free Wi-Fi that at the airport that Jordan always tells us to do, absolutely somebody could, right? And you're using that to authenticate, like absolutely somebody could be playing a man-in-the-middle attack there for you, and that is concerning. Again, kind of like we were talking OpenSSH, Radius itself is not a single product, so there are multiple products that implement the concept of Radius. Microsoft is one of them, so Microsoft has its own Radius on-prem solution. To my knowledge, they have not moved away from MD5 yet. Not yet. I think if I remember right, they are beginning to work on it, but they haven't done so. So just be aware of this. If you're using Radius, I would suggest you go ahead and read that. Just some noteworthy blogs here, not just because 2 of our own here at Patchmark PC wrote it, but somebody, Ben, Rudy, and Matthias went through and kind of tried to do a rundown of this new version of Autopilot. And they go into some really crazy deep depth into what's going on in the background, as they are wont to do. Another blog post here by Peter. Apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently if you download even updated ISOs from Microsoft, they include a ridiculously old version of Edge. And I guess even servicing that image does not fix that problem. And so what do you do during Autopilot? Peter here has a solution, which is basically, hey, there's a command line. So you can, a command line and in a script that creates a way to create the detection method. So you can run this as an app within the Autopilot process. So that's worth calling out. Lastly, a favorite of ours, we talked about this ad nauseum months ago, which is, oh no, wait a minute, this is the other one. There are changes to the Microsoft, let me see if I can find this. Yes, in the latest update for Insider, is this Insider? Microsoft has made a change to how Windows installer and the user account UAC works. And this might seem innocuous, but there's actually some, how to say this? There are certain applications that rely on the repair process to fully populate per user or per account information. And so this is slightly concerning insofar as now you need to run through the repair process, but to do so, you're going to get a user UAC prompt, and you would need to be, in theory, an admin to make these changes. We have Dan Go who's unfortunately on vacation. He was not unable to join us today. He's tried to test this and replicate those scenarios. He has not been able to do so. He has not been able to replicate this concern we have. So I haven't seen anyone confirm that this is an actual issue. But so I would say stay tuned. And if you know of any products that have this issue, let us know. Let the world know. I know we want to do some more digging on that. So that's just kind of a heads up, something to be slightly worried about. Another thing that impacts us is Microsoft decided to retire the Office 365 connectors within Microsoft Teams. So connectors are kind of the webhook things that allow you to have Teams receive notices from, let's say, automation processes, and they're replacing it with something that is far more complicated, and even worse. The timeline on this is extremely ridiculously short. So this was announced July 3rd, and I believe effective October 1st of this year, all connectors will stop working. As of the 15th of the next month, you can't create a new one. So this impacts PatchMyPC as well. We have connectors into Teams that many of our customers use and appreciate, so that when we publish a new update, you get a notice. This absolutely impacts us. No, I don't have any details right now to share with you about our timeline for fixing it, but I can tell you we are aware that we have our absolute best people on it. And by that I mean neither me, Jordan, or Jordan.
That is correct.
That is correct.
Neither you, Jordan, or Jordan.
Well, I was going to say Jake, but
That's a given.
Well,
yeah, I know. See, I thought it was redundant, so then
I appreciate you, Brian.
I went to be even more redundant. But yes, this is an issue. Again, not just PatchMyPC. If you have any webhooks, if you have anything, look at your team. If you are using Teams, first, moment of silence, sorry. Second, go look at anything you have, any kind of channel that's receiving automated messages from outside of your environment or even inside your environment. Any automated messages, and they may stop working in October, which is kind of concerning. Lastly, I want to highlight, not lastly, and let me do this one first, and then I'll talk about that one. Sorry, I just messed our marketing team, and I'm sure putting these links in there. So we have talked about the WinRE thing. We talked about it for months, still an issue. They updated the KB recently with some information about, with this little bit here. This update is not needed and will not be offered in your Windows recovery environment. There's a bunch of scenarios where you didn't have a Windows recovery environment. You didn't have that partition, and yet the update would consistently want to try to install. And Microsoft's now saying, well, it won't offer itself. What I have been unable to confirm is that they actually updated the update to make this true. Because I can tell you, excuse me, in these scenarios, I know that historically it was being offered. This update was being offered. And so in order to make this true, they would have had to re-release this update. Second of all, they also say this update is not needed if there's not enough space. And I kind of take issue with that. I don't think if you are unable to install an update because you don't have room to install the update, I don't think that makes you secure. And Jordan can double check me on that one. But I don't think that because you're vulnerable, but you can't install the update, that means you are now secure. And so that wording concerns me. And it did also put here that, hey, they kind of finally laid out. They hadn't really said this in this KB, which is like, you need at least 250 megabytes of free space in that recovery partition.
yeah, I mean, yes, now you know why we asked about the 0 bytes free. That's exactly it, right? Like,
right.
Just because you have less than that, like as long as you have sufficient space for the vulnerability to unpack, right? Then it's still vulnerable. Like that's right. Like I don't know how, unless we're trying to say that like the current maybe the current vulnerability / executing code won't unpack unless there's at least 250 megs, which is also just happens to be the minimum amount of space that the patch needs to unpack
Do its thing.
for it. Like
it's it seems
and
concerning.
It also
It's
assumes, right, that like that space will never become free as well.
yeah, yeah, that's true. So yeah, just again, the thing I really want to know is whether they actually re-released the binaries for this. And here's the problem: that this update isn't in the update catalog, so you can't go to catalog.update.microsoft.com or whatever it is and look for this KB. You can't, and it's not in WSUS or Config Manager. So again, you can't actually go and sync and see if it's there. And because it doesn't exist in these two places, I can't go look at the release and revised date to know if it's been updated. This is only being delivered through Windows Update and Microsoft Update, which is to say, are you using Intune or Windows Update for Business, right? And there's no, this update doesn't exist anywhere for me to check if they released it. But if they haven't re-released it, then most of this is a lie. So I don't understand. But moving along, the last thing we're going to talk about here is, no thanks. This got absolute. I have written a strongly worded letter to the team about this. They announced that they are going to deprecate WSUS driver synchronization. Now, on some level, I don't really care. And what I mean by that is, if in WSUS you can no longer select the driver update category, and in doing so, completely destroy your WSUS instance, like that actually seems kind of like a net good. Like that I don't really have a strong concern about, because anyone who did so basically immediately stopped patching. So that might be okay. But the thing that concerns me is that you also can't simply import a driver from the update catalog. So let's say let's say you have WSUS and you were like, well, okay, yeah, we don't want to sync every driver because that's absolutely crazy and insane. But there is this one driver and it's in the catalog and I want to pull it in. And I want to deploy this one driver to solve this problem or security issue I have. And the answer is, as I understand it, no, you will not be able to do that. Not only will you not be able to sync, you won't be able to go to the update catalog and directly import it into WSUS. What I do have,
don't worry, you can use the old school device driver packages, to do it.
Yeah, I did. I read that and immediately just completely ignored it.
Open your mouth a little bit.
Yeah, the bigger concern I had about this is whether or not it would impact the driver catalogs that HP, Lenovo, and Dell put out, right? Like, okay, can I import catalogs? Can I use and that's called local publishing if you want to go look up the docs. Can I locally publish into WSUS drivers? And I have been told by the PM of that team that yes, that will continue to work. But that is at this point email official. So I don't know how much. I haven't tried, or I can't confirm this, whether this is true or not. But just be aware, if you are deploying drivers via WSUS, because again, Config Manager itself doesn't even let you sync drivers. It won't let you enable that category. But if you're doing so, or you are importing drivers from the catalog into WSUS, if that was your plan for driver management, just know that that is officially deprecated, and it will stop in apparently April 18, 2025. Now, it'll probably be a different date, but like next year, they're going to kill this. Thank you for those that have kicked around. Don't know why you did. I'm always surprised when people show up every month, but I thank you for doing it. We love doing these. Have a great weekend. Talk to you all later.
Bye.
Bye. And as for skins with microtransactions, only the skin of Jake in a grape skirt will be included.
I'm here for it. That's got to be a premium skin, if anything.